Okay, hello everybody and welcome back to Environmental Science 101. This time we cover biodiversity, our Unit 3. So, what are our objectives for this? First, define biodiversity. What is it? And how does it measure ecological health? What are the different types as well? And what are the levels of organization of those types? We will examine the benefits of biodiversity, both from the ecological perspective and from the perspective of providing benefits to human beings through this concept of the ecosystem services. We'll talk about human impacts on biodiversity, which, to be clear, is pretty much all going to be negative. And we will look at the biodiversity of Sonoran Desert, and maybe Arizona as a whole, a little bit. Okay, so what are the sections for these videos? So first is going to be biodiversity. We do ecosystem services, the benefits to human beings, the economics. We'll talk about human impacts in detail, and then finally we do biodiversity in Arizona. Okay, so we will get to our first section, right? So ecological health and biodiversity in section 1. Okay, so if we asked essentially anybody on Earth to pick out which one of these two is healthier, they would pick the one on the right, I'm sure. And what this would really come down to more than anything else would be their eyes, seeing a variety of colors, and seeing a variety of colors as being indicative of many kinds of life, and that many kinds of life is a good thing. Now, we could just stop the video there and go home and say that we all understand it. We'll dig into all the details for the rest of these, but keep in mind, on some level, we have some intuition for this. This coral on the left has been bleached and is dead, probably because the water is too warm, it might be too acidic, or it could be some sort of secondary consequence from other factors. This one is alive and healthy. We could look at another example within our Sonoran Desert. So again, on some level, right, we would all pick the photo on the left intuitively. It's got nice colors, it's got these mountains in the background, it's a much better photo. But we could also count the number of species, right? We could look and say, okay, we've got our saguaro cactuses, we've got these things, our teddy bear cholla, otherwise known as jumping cactus, because if you walk by, you don't feel the spines go in, but then you go to move away, and it feels like the cactus has jumped on you. True story. We can see some other stuff. So I think these are chaparral bushes here. This might be an ocotillo here in the background. That's definitely one. Maybe a little bit of brittle bush here, right? Okay, so let's compare to the one on the right. So if we really wanted to, we could piece out in the back, maybe some palo verdes or acacias or mesquites here. Could be some shrubby type stuff over here, right? Maybe some brittle bush. And then all the rest of it is this one kind of plant. Maybe we've seen this before with a sort of uneasy looking unnatural yellow. More on that in a bit. This one is better. It's more diverse in essentially every way here. And most importantly, right, we're not just going to be looking at the cute animals. I'm sorry, I know, that's a different class. We're going to be looking not just at mammals, which, as we have learned, are just a small fraction of all the species out there, but talking about the sum total of all of them, right? So these, especially terrestrial vertebrates, right, tend to be very salient, and, you know, they capture our heart. And the compassion is good, but we need to have the compassion and the understanding and the concrete terms and measuring at the same time, right? So just going down our list, right, of all groups of identified species, and it depends who you ask, right, on the number and when you get your data, right? But 2 million is a perfectly reasonable number. About half of them are insects. Sorry, right? If you want to be really lazy about it, all life on Earth is insect life. Mollusks, a group that's going to include things like squids and clams, gastropods as well, that would be snails. Arachnids are spiders, crustaceans, or little sea bugs, right? They would be arthropods, actually very not so distantly related to other kinds of bugs. Sorry, not sorry. Right? Fish, reptiles, then birds, then amphibians, then mammals. And corals are here because they are important, and we will see another reason why. So what is biodiversity? I have a definition here, a measure of the variation in or within life forms. That is my definition, but I don't like it very much. The proper definition of this term would be so expansive that it would essentially break out into 3 or 4 slides, which is what we're going to do. But we're looking at variation in life forms, different species, or within a certain population. So if we went back, right, if we considered just the saguaros, we could look at their genetics and assess how diverse it is, right? What kinds of different genes are available, and that will lead us straight into our first kind of biodiversity in a bit. What we want ultimately is a quantifiable, you can put a number to it, measurable, discrete way of assessing ecological health. On some level, being able to put this into numbers is critical. Critical for understanding and critical for making the case for protecting it. Tends to be greatest near the equator. Warm waters, warm temperatures, broadly speaking, are going to be better. It's also where we have rainforests. And yes, this is going to include all life, not just animals, not just plants. So this is going to be animals, plants, fungi, bacteria, everything else. We got 3 levels of it, or 3 types. We've got genetic, biodiversity, species, and ecosystem, right? So for genetic, we can think that, we have this population of dogs. Is there a lot of genetic diversity here? Yes, it's huge, right? If we were to look at the genomes, these are very, very different, right, between each one of them. Huge diversity here, right? And we have an example here of high species diversity, a lot of different groups represented. And then finally, ecosystem diversity. I'll get out of the way here, right? We can notice, right, so this would be hypothetical, right? But we could have all of these in the same region somewhere, somehow, right? That would be a huge amount of ecosystem biodiversity. Why? Because we have all different sorts of abiotic factors going on, all sorts of different communities. Okay, those are our 3 levels. So we can look at genetic biodiversity first, right? The amount of genetic variety within a single species population. So these are bananas, right? We got a lot of different colors, just like with the dogs before. This is a good thing. We talked about natural selection. So natural selection needs genetic diversity to act on, right? Genetic variation, because you need a population where you've got all these different sorts of genes running around so that some of them can be selected for, right? So that in response to stress, some of them can win out. Now, as a result of the selection process, the total biodiversity, or genetic biodiversity, we should say, actually goes down as a result of selection. So if you have some extreme sort of selection event, right, which kills off 90% of your population, and only, 10% who have light wings on the moth, right, survive, that is going to reduce this, but it's needed, it acts on it. So there's an interplay between these. Yeah, bigger is better on this, we want more basically every time. And the reason for this is that a population with a lot of genetic diversity can shift in any direction depending on stress, right? From the standpoint of wanting them to survive, this is good. If we have a lot of genetic variety, then no matter what the stressor, there's going to be some members in there who are going to be adapted to it. And this is putting into terms this term gene pool. I don't really like this term, but maybe we've heard it before, usually used in a sort of negative sense, right? Which is going to be the sum total combination of all the genes and their forms that are present in some sort of reproducing species population. Just another term for genetic biodiversity, really, or really genetic biodiversity is measuring the variation within the gene pool, we could say. Okay, species biodiversity, right? This is what a lot of times we're thinking of when we talk about biodiversity, broadly speaking. There are different ways to measure this, right? So we can look at richness, abundance, and evenness. I have the definitions over here, but we'll just move straight to the example, right? So richness, how many different species, right? We count A, B, C, D, 4 kinds of trees up here, and 4 kinds of trees in our community down here. These would have the same richness. So is this the best measure? No. Is it good and a part of a good measure? Yes, right? So we need to know it, but it's not the end of the story. We also have this matter of abundance, right? So how many individuals there are of the species, or each species overall. More abundance is going to be better, broadly speaking, from an ecological perspective, right? So we have a high abundance of, right, what are these? The type A trees, and this one. In here, they are pretty well spread out, but it seems like we have pretty much the same number of trees overall. So actually, abundance in these 2 cases would be roughly equal if you wanted to consider them as a community. And then finally, we have evenness. So how balanced the abundances are of all these different species, right? So here we've got good evenness. Here we've got really bad evenness. Now, in certain cases, right, if we're dealing with other things instead of trees, other special cases, right? We might want a breakdown like this in terms of evenness, but if we just assume ourselves to be ignorant, we assume this thing to be really complicated, which it is, you end up erring on this, right? Weighting all the different ones equally as just an acknowledgement of your own ignorance. Okay, we can talk about ecosystem biodiversity, right? So this is variation in habitats, which we know, communities, and abiotic factors within a given region. So I have pulled this over here on the right out of the Sonoran Desert, right? So these are different ecosystems that might be present in the Sonoran Desert ecoregion overall, right? So we're here. And we can see this is actually really, really good. And we'll come back to this later when we talk about Arizona and the Sonoran Desert specifically. But this is a huge variety of different ecosystems. This is good. And this term, right, ecosystem diversity or ecosystem biodiversity, can also account for complexity within those ecosystems or the variety of niches available in each one. Okay, so that is all for the what is biodiversity and what are the types. Next, we will talk about the benefits of it for human beings.